Welcome to Unfair Fights. My name's Rebekah. This is Nathan, and we are going to be talking about the evolution of circulatory systems, if there is such a thing. And today I am challenging Nathan on this topic because I don't think circulatory systems, which are complex integrated systems, are something that can come about by a step-by-step process of time, chance, and mutations over millions of years. So, Nathan, do you want to say a few words about that?
Well, I hope I don't have a heart attack, you know. Uh, no, I do want to say something. I think this is a great topic. Um, and unfortunately, I didn't get to research it because this is unfair. So unfair. You throwing this at me, all these pictures of complicated circulatory systems, and expecting me just to throw something together out of nothing. But perhaps that's what you think evolution is. So, yes, if we have any unfair friends on here who have done a little research on the circulation or what scientists believe about evolution of the circulatory system, that would be very helpful. But I have thought about things and kind of come up with my own, uh, some possibilities, some ideas. And so it's just going to be the world according to Nathan, unless we get some scientists on here telling me what really happened. Yes, so go ahead, Rebekah, present this evidence.
Well, one of the reasons that I chose this topic is because there is no evolutionary explanation for these things. So, for anybody watching, I'm sure Nathan's explanation is going to be as good as anything that exists because there actually isn't much of an evolutionary story, even storytelling. Usually you can find some very good evolutionary storytelling on this, but this one, I guess we just don't have enough good evolutionary storytellers to come up with a story this ridiculous and proposal. But I did find one article on this, and so I've taken some quotes from that. But what's interesting is, just as usual, when you do look at stuff about evolution, there's some little evolutionary tricks, but I linked this I linked to this article in the description of this video if anybody else wants to look at it. So it's evolutionary origins of blood vascular system and endothelium. Now, it's a really pretty interesting article discussing different cardiovascular systems, and there is no discussion really of how these systems could have developed by a step-by-step process. Now, what it does is it'll explain the system, and then it'll say, we think it evolved because there was a need for more oxygen or something like that. But that actually tells us nothing about how this evolution could have happened. So, Nathan, I mean, maybe you'll be the first one to actually come up with something. So go for it. Let me just introduce the problem, and then we'll hear what your proposal is. So here's basically just a human evolution, a human.
Hold on a second. You said problem, but I think it's evidence. Let's present the evidence of evolution here, and then I'll describe it.
Let's present the problem for evolution. That is what I mean, because really we've got we're familiar with human circulatory system, most of us, and I want people to really think about what's involved here, because you've got your heart, you've got your lungs that have to get the oxygen to the heart, you've got the blood vessels that are carrying this to every cell in your body. If every cell in your body does not get nutrients from your circulatory system, they've only got minutes. So this is not something that you've got a long time to get right. And you've also got to have the connection to the brain. You've also got connections to all kinds of other organs, from the small intestine getting nutrients to basically the nutrients from your food. So all of these things go into your circulatory system. You've got your immune system. All of these things are interconnected. And I think that's a huge problem for a step-by-step process that has to develop over millions of years. Now, some people may want to just right away say, well, yeah, but most animals don't have such a complex circulatory system as we have. But every animal that you look at, and I'm just going to show images here from a lobster circulatory system, incredibly complex. You've got even an earthworm circulatory system. As far back as we look at circulatory systems, as far back in the evolutionary scenario, hundreds of millions of years ago, you have complete circulatory systems. So when did these develop, and how could this have developed? Go ahead, Nathan, explain.
So, in thinking about this issue, I thought about a couple different things. Number one, in a way, human fetus kind of goes through processes, kind of stretching back in time in order to, develop into a human in the womb. So that was one of the things I was thinking about. Another one had to do with just methods of movement, waste, and nutrients. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And then the last thing is kind of a mathematical thing. And of course, I didn't want to research it, but I've read about fractals a little bit, so maybe I can try and piece something together there. So number one, if we go way, 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 way back, because like you're saying, this process, this system goes way back, and it pretty much goes back. I would say the beginnings are just things floating around, and whatever comes along, and maybe there's a little motility there.
Is this before life?
No, I don't want to go back that far because that's another topic that we haven't talked about. But
Okay,
it's very
so
close.
While the things are floating around, how is this living organism getting nutrients?
Well, that's just it. It's kind of like you're in the soup, and if you get a piece of bread today, hey, that's great. If you get a carrot, that's great. Not that those things existed, but whatever the microbial equivalent of a meal is, and you're just pooping, and you're living in your own poop, all the time, just excreting your waste right back into the medium. Okay, so now I think that the next thing is that you might have these slimes, kind of these biofilms, and the other process that I was thinking about, and in a way is similar, is with cancer. There's a lot of genes that get turned on in cancer that are also present in the womb. And the way that scientists now look at cancer, or they're having to start looking at cancer, is as a colony, a spheroid, is what they use often, or an organoid, I think. And so you have this. Why do they have to do this? Well, they have to try and get good drugs to the center of the spheroid, because what happens is you have this colony of cells that grows, and the inside is hypoxic, lacks oxygen and stuff like that. And so the cells grow slowly, but they're also protected by the cells on the outside. And so I think that this is kind of the beginnings of, some sort of multicellular organism. But one of the problems with this is, how do you get the right amount of nutrients inside and get the waste out? So you might have some cells that are better at protecting, kind of like, proto skin cells, let's call them, and then you have other cells that are inside that are, basically providing something to the exterior, and they're growing much more slowly. And so if we think about that, then you say, okay, what are some transport mechanisms? And I came up with two. Okay. And I think that these might kind of indicate the difference between, again, this is the world according to Nathan, what developed into plants and what developed into animals. And along with this, like you talked about oxygen, that's also part of it. But in terms of the transport mechanism, when I think of a plant, I'm thinking about kind of more, you could have an electrical charge, right? Like not talking about like a cottonwood or something huge, but you could have an electrical charge on one side of this, slime, and you could have a negative charge on the other, a positive charge and negative charge, and that might cause some sort of, you know, flow of material through the organism or through the slime, let's say. So that's kind of one, is kind of an electrical charge. Then you could have kind of cooperation, okay? And this comes in two forms, and I think both of these are present in humans. One is both of them are kind of essentially peristaltic, but in a different way. Okay, so like you think about your trachea, it like pinches as it goes down into your stomach. Okay, so that's one method. And the other one is I kind of think about it like kind of like a flow, like go with the flow. Like everything is like, hey, hey, party time, and it's kind of like jiggling back and forth, back and forth, and this creates kind of a wave pattern. All right, so this might be more like your small intestine or something where everything's liquid. And so you think about these clumps of stuff floating around, right? And some of the cells develop better motility and they may have become more like bacteria that are floating around. But other ones are like, no, we're going to stay here. We're going to bring the goods to ourselves, right? Because it's protective or something like that, or we like sitting on the bottom of this rock or whatever. And so they have to create this kind of nutrient flow, right? So they're not just at the whim of the environment as much, right? And so what?
This story is getting really long. Can you
Okay.
shorten it up? I mean,
Yes.
how
Well, I'm
do we
sorry.
get all of these things? Okay.
Listen. You're saying, okay, here's a circulatory system. How did it evolve over millions of years? I mean, that's a pretty long story, right? I mean, mine is highly condensed here. Okay. In any way, I think that certain cells started pulsing, and maybe the pulsing was to get nutrients locally to flow to them. But over time, it developed that they began to pulse in harmony, and that's the beginnings of what became the heart. Okay, and then for the vascular system, I think that mathematically, the best way to fill a volume at the edges is through a fractal. And so you have, but this is just like, it seems complicated, but it's like a mathematical formula where a small change becomes a big change later. Or trees, the way the trees branch out, I think there's also like primes or something going up the tree, but anyway, I can research it. So anyway, there's a mathematical system that makes it better for filling volume. And so this is what I would expect from our vascular system, is that it also uses some sort of fractal system to fill the volume with the most blood vessels, or enough blood vessels. So that's how I think it came about. I think it came about as tiny things trying to get some nutrients, trying to get rid of its waste, and it slowly became an organization. And then at some point, a single cell could do all of those functions, and it became a multicellular organism. And then with bacteria colonies or whatever, and then eventually you had going on and on. And I think you can kind of see that process happening in the womb, and then also in sea creatures. There's other ways it could have
What do
gone.
you mean
We
in
have
the
these.
womb? How do you see that happening in the womb?
Well, you have cells differentiate into three different types, and I think that where these cells come together and spread, it's based on proteins that are present. But I also think that it has to do with pressures on a micro level. That what type of, like, the ones on the outside begin to express what is it, ectoderm proteins, and there's a complicated chain of processes of differentiation where they start as a basically a do everything type cell, and then it differentiates or evolves in the womb into one that is suitable better to be on the outside or on the inside or part of the brain or part of an organ, and that kind of thing.
So, but you realize that in the womb, these cells are already going to do that. It's not an evolutionary process. It's something that is already basically
Yeah.
programmed to happen.
But I think it's like kind of like millions of years of evolution in a way happening in a short time. But it has all the instructions to do that. But I think if you look at it, it's probably following a similar path to what happened in evolution. So if you say, okay, this happens earlier on where it differentiates into these three things, I would expect that millions of years ago there was some, common ancestor that also did that on some level. So if you look at what happens in the womb, I think that you're kind of watching evolution go fast.
Well, for the viewers, I really hope that nobody buys this story, because what happens in the womb is incredibly complex. And as Nathan has stated, there had to be a plan in place. And so this is totally, completely different than something that has no plan, that has no process except this process of time and chance and mutations happening over time that need to collect millions of coordinated mutations to make a single protein. And I think this is a good time to bring up. I mean, there's so much. We're not even going to get to everything that I want to talk about, but I think it's a good time to bring up blood. So, I mean, first of all, blood itself has a lot going on in the blood. So, you've got the plasma, you've got all the stuff that's in the plasma delivering nutrients, but you've got the red blood cells, and which develop hemoglobin, and I have a little hemoglobin protein right here. But these steps that I've listed here, these are the steps that are involved in the creation of hemoglobin, and we're just talking about one little step in a gigantic system of incredibly complicated steps. But this is what the body, that each little red blood cell has to do in the human body to make hemoglobin. And so this is not something that can develop by things bumping and waving and hoping and just starting to pulsate and things like this. I mean, all of these proteins that are listed here, all of these steps that are involved in making the hemoglobin, these are things that are incredibly complex parts that are built for this to work. And that's just, we're just talking about blood. I'd like to know, when does the blood come in? Did the blood vessels get built first, or the blood?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you asked this. Obviously I don't know for sure. I'm just going to make another story.
Well, I mean, how do you envision a body that is full of blood vessels and full of these? Okay, and maybe you'd say, let's take it down to the earthworm then. If we need to go to a simple organism,
earthworm is extremely complicated. It's very far along.
Well, okay. So then which organism are you proposing, and which circulatory system are you proposing is maybe the oldest?
Well, if you're saying what's the oldest, that you have to go back to the beginning. And that is, I think that you have either one cell that has gotten the ability to make two types. Like, oh, I've got defender type, where I can differentiate into defender type, or inside type, grow fast type, and then slow down. Right? Maybe those are the two types, and it creates a little colony of protection. And that may not seem like much of a protection, but against single cells, that are floating around. That might be a huge protection, right? To have an outside and inside, or to defend against differing chemical changes. Like, for instance, why is it so hard to kill biofilms? Think about your mouth. Every day you try and kill everything in your mouth by brushing your teeth, and it survives. Well, so you're going from a really one pH to another pH trying to kill it, and any individual cell would die. But because it's in a biofilm, the ones on the outside get damaged and killed, but the ones on the inside are alive and can grow back in to the colony, right? And so just at that level, already the cells there, if a cell on the outside developed the ability to provide an oxygen molecule. Now, maybe it doesn't start out as hemoglobin, which is really complicated and a great trap for oxygen, but maybe it's just like a molecule that happens to be a little more I don't know, negative or positive on one side, and so an oxygen molecule is more likely to transverse the membrane of the biofilm to the interior. Well, already the cell on the inside that has that ability as well, but it's latent, and the one on the outside that's providing it is a better system than a system where it's just like, hey, you guys on the inside, you're on your own, snacks in the back of the truck or whatever. But no, this other one is like, I'm gonna throw a Twinkie over my shoulder every 8 miles, whatever, down the road. And that's going to be better for the interior kids, to survive, the interior cells. So,
well, I love how you have all this surviving going on without the circulatory system built, when every creature that we look at has a system for getting nutrients throughout its body. So I don't know where these creatures are that don't have a system and a complex system that is able to bring nutrients and keep it alive. Okay, but I want to show you what this paper says for others who might be like, come on, there's got to be a better evolutionary explanation than this. I want to just show you a couple of facts from this. And like I said, this is like one of the main things I could find on the evolution of circulatory systems. Okay, so I read this whole paper. Something interesting I noticed is that they admit there's no trace of the cardiovascular system in the fossil record. Now, Taya went and actually read and found a couple more recent articles, because this is maybe from 10 years ago, where we do have some fossils now where we found traces of circulatory system. But basically, anyone who's saying it developed in such and such a way, what we don't have anywhere in the fossil record is any type of thing that would show us how a cardiovascular system could develop by a step-by-step process, because every creature that we find had some way of completely supplying its body with nutrients. So there's, and every creature we find today has a way to do that. So the fossil record doesn't help. Go ahead.
So what are you saying, that all the creatures in the flood that died didn't have vascular systems? I mean, this is what it's like. I'm trying to explain evolution, but you've got to explain the same systems. And if you just say, okay, God snapped his fingers, okay, well, that's fine. I don't have any problem with somebody saying that, but it does seem like in time, in the fossil record, all around us, there seems to be some sort of pattern. And what scientists are trying to do is look at that pattern and go, how could we arrive at this today?
And this is hilarious, Nathan. I cannot believe how deep your indoctrination is into this, that for you, it must be a step-by-step process over time that develops. Remember, you have an evolutionary story. I have a story that you supposedly believe in too, that God created, right? God created each animal after its kind. The circulatory system that we have today, we had before the flood. There was no need for development.
Well,
I
but
don't need to develop one.
you just found a piece of evidence that seems to contradict that. All the animals in the fossil record don't have one, you said.
No, we don't have these are soft body parts, so we don't have a trace of them in.
So here's the real explanation. Here's the real explanation that they're not in the fossil record, not because we went from no vascular system to a complicated vascular system, which is the argument you were making.
Okay, if I said this in a confusing way, I am sorry, but I never intended to say we went from no cardiovascular system to having one. I said we don't have a trace of it. I'm reading straight from the paper because I was actually saying the opposite. If you were listening to me, I was saying all the animals that we've ever found in the fossil record seem to be complete organisms. Even if we don't have their soft body parts, they were obviously living and getting nutrients to their body, right? So I was not
I
at
don't
all
know. Maybe they
maybe
just maybe it was just a snap of the finger and the blood transported in. I don't know. I'm not sure. You know what I mean? If you introduce miracles, maybe they didn't have vascular systems before the flood. You know, I don't know. But when we look at the world, it seems like, you know, you have differing tracks of animals stretching back, and then at some point you find things that are in common with them, and then you find certain things that are in common if you go further back between animals and plants and fungi and all of that. And so to me, if you look at the world as it is today, it seems like there is a story there.
Only because you've been indoctrinated, Nathan.
I don't think so.
Before people came up with the idea of evolution, they were already grouping animals together by similarities.
Right.
Just grouping animals together by similarities does not tell you that they developed slowly over millions of years. That is an evolutionary story. It's not. You can have a totally different story, which I do, which is God created each animal according to its kind. And yes, we can group animals by similarities, but that doesn't tell us that their history came from a common ancestor.
But I do think that there's going to be something interesting if you study this. Now, again, this is just a story. I didn't do any research, but I suspect that if you go back through a human fetus and you go to see what genes and what proteins are active earlier on, you're going to find that those genes and proteins that are activated earlier on are more likely to be further down the branches of the similarities between organisms. That's what I think you'll find. And that's a hypothesis. Okay, we have a...
Okay, Taya makes a comment, but I want to go back to the fetuses in a minute. Taya said small and flat triploblasts, flatworms, are the only creature that have no system of fluid support. They obtain all O2 and food via simple diffusion across the skin and gut. Thank you, Taya.
Thanks, Taya. I think you're on mute, or maybe I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. Most other triploblastic animals have a fluid-filled cavity between Bosy wall, ectoderm, and digestive tube, endoderm, called the coelom. I don't know how to pronounce that.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you, Taya. Okay, cool. Yeah, but again, animal organisms that have a way to bring nutrients to their body, right?
Wait a second. She just gave you a worm that doesn't have one. And then you have a worm that doesn't have a circulatory system the way that we have it, right? It's closer to what I was talking about, where you have just whatever comes along, that's what you get, right? Diffusion, okay?
And I'm sure if we actually studied those flatworms, we'd find that the process by which they're getting those nutrients isn't just flowing stuff. Ooh, piece of bread or whatever. Okay,
I
so
think I have an unfair friend now. So you got some
I
trouble,
don't know why
Rebecca.
you're on my side, Taya. Don't forget you're on my side. Just kidding. Um, but I want to go back to the development in the womb that you mentioned, because I actually learned something very interesting about the development of the baby in the womb with regard to the circulatory system, because they're not using their lungs for the whole time that they're in the in the womb. So do you know, Nathan, how they're able to bypass the lungs at that time, and then suddenly the moment they're born they're able to start using their lungs? It's they have
Yeah,
two
the blood and yeah, go ahead.
they have two holes in their heart that are actually causing it to bypass, and the moment the baby comes out of the womb and takes its first breath, those flaps close and they start sealing up. And so there's even a whole system in place for the baby to
I
not use its lungs and then suddenly be able to
I
use
think
it.
it's wonderful.
Yeah,
I think it's
it's
wonderful. It's
wonderful.
marvelous.
And
It's
I would
fantastic.
it, it's marvelous, and these are the types of things that don't come about by random processes, material processes, mindless processes. These are the types of things that have to be put in place by a mind and intelligence, someone who can actually engineer and plan all these things. Your system, think about your circulatory system and all of these animals that we looked at, even the flatworm, it has a way to get nutrients to its body to be able to live and to function. And so we have, I mean, think about how all these systems have to be working together. How do you propose all of these things came together in such a fantastic way? Like, what is without a mind?
Well, I mean, uh, I'm going to take a view that I don't actually espouse right now because I do believe there was a mind. But if there was no mind, if there were only mechanistic processes, I don't know if it could happen that way. But I would say this: even if there is a mind, right? It seems like that mind has left a trail of breadcrumbs that seems to point to evolution because the evidence I think that's there is for a long period of time and for animals evolving slowly. Now, with if there was a mind directing that, great. I think it's wonderful. I think it's fantastic the way that humans work. I think that from a strictly materialist, empiricist kind of method, they would say there is no mind. There's just the universe. I don't know how you get the universe, but yeah, there's just a universe, and these things happen over time. But I do think that if you look at what scientists are studying, they're making guesses about how things happen, and sometimes they're right and sometimes they're wrong. They never publish very often the ones that they're wrong on, unfortunately. But it seems like it seems like you know uh, sometimes they find things and then it fits the picture, and other times they find things and it doesn't fit the picture, and they have to update the picture, to go along with what they find. But what they seem to find is that you have increasingly complicated organisms over time.
Now, where but I mean and this would take us into a totally different topic, so I don't necessarily want to go there. I'm just going to state my objection. I don't think they're seeing more complicated organisms over time, because I don't think that we're looking back hundreds of millions of years ago when we look into the fossil record.
Yes.
So that's my
Yes,
objection.
but I mean, you keep saying that, right?
I'm saying it from, you mean,
Yes,
when because I'm trying to say within your model, how could this have happened?
but
Right.
right,
And so I'm
but
using the hundreds of
but I
millions of years according to your model.
Yes, I understand, but the flood story narrative or whatever, I still think that you have to account on a level. You're saying, okay, I'm a young Earth creationist, God just popped it into existence. Then I think it becomes a philosophical problem for you, because why would God make it look like evolution was true? Because I think it
It
does.
human stupidity is not God's fault. Okay? It is not God's fault that people came up with these ideas and that then they indoctrinated generations of people with this idea of millions and billions of years of development over time. That is not God's fault. When I look around, when I see massive in all the rock formations that I see around me, I don't see millions of years. I see catastrophe. I see uh you know gigantic evidence of water flooding everything. Okay? So why is it that you see something so different?
Okay, well then if you pick up a piece of dirt and you look at these organisms and you find an earthworm and you find a flatworm and you find bacteria and you find fungi and all of this, and you sequence all of that DNA or whatever, I think you're gonna start emerging with the same picture that the evolutionists do, which is that there are similar, and you're gonna call them similarities and differences, and they're going to call them similarities and differences based on a long record of time. And then you go, okay, well, is the Earth old or young? Well, if we look at the cosmos, it seems like it's very old. So and then how do you
Well,
put those
you
two
can
things
bring
together?
that up at your next thing because right now we're on circulatory.
Okay,
And
well,
I'm
back to
going
circulatory system. Back to circulatory system.
yes, and I want to just put a few more of these comments from a few quotes from this paper that I read. So this is an interesting one because this is something they observed, and let me show this slide about the octopus. Okay, so they say the octopus the octopus, just a few facts about it. It has 3 hearts, and most mollusks only have 1 heart, and it has a closed circulatory system where most mollusks have an open circulatory system. So this is one of those things, and there's many things like this throughout these evolutionary trees where the group of animals that this is most closely related to in in the evolutionary phylogenetic trees, it has a totally different circulatory system. Now, here's the what this paper says about this. The open system reverted back to a closed design in an ancestral cephalopod. I always mess this up. Cephalopod. This is an example of convergent evolution whereby an analogous structure, the closed circulation in cephalopods, arose independently of a closed circulation in other invertebrates and invertebrates. So basically, it had to revert to a different system. And so I just wanted to share that this is one of the things where, you're according to your development story, right? Whenever their development doesn't go as expected and something seems to fit better into a different category, rather than admitting, hey, we have a problem here with our developmental tree, they make up a word. And convergent evolution is a word that is just made up to help them with a problem. The problem that this doesn't fit into their group. It doesn't fit into the phylogenetic tree the way it should if these all developed from a common ancestor. So they invoke this convergent evolution for the octopus circulatory system. So, what do you have to say about that?
Well, I think that's because the phenomena is still useful, right? Flight is useful. So you have some animals develop flight in one way, and other animals develop flight in a different way. And maybe they develop into a flying animal, And then later on, because there's long periods of time, it's useful for a certain branch of that tree to go back to crawling on the ground. And the same, I think, is true with cephalopods. It's like, okay, an open system was better in certain environments, but then a certain motility was needed or something like that. And it's like, well, I can't take the environment with me. And so there's a divergence, and some, end up utilizing some of the older machinery to recreate the wheel, essentially, to get moving. Um, so to me, and it's like, and it's completely different than the original one. Well, that's because it had to evolve again.
So why do we have so many different systems working in the same ocean?
Because
It's the same environment. So why doesn't the octopus have fins? Fins are good. Why does
why do some people rollerblade? And some people ride, why do they ride roller skates? And why do some people use a skateboard? And why do some people use a bicycle? They're all on the same asphalt. They're all on the same pavement. And then you have bipeds, people just walking around like me. I mean, some people like to use a moto scooter. I mean,
but the difference is, and the difference between, the reason your analogy doesn't work is because you are appealing to the environment for developing these certain features. You're saying it's better for this environment. So I'm saying, if it's better for this environment, then why not stick to the same plan? Why didn't they all develop? But anyway, I don't expect you to have an answer for that, because it's all just evolutionary.
No. Yeah. I mean, let's talk about this a little bit. So we're all in the same environment, yes, but some people say, I'm going to try. I'm going to have really sharp, pointy skin, and other things are saying, no, I'm going to be very fast. There's different ways to survive, right? And some people hide, and some people do this, and it's all the same environment, and they all need a certain level of nutrients. Some of them need less, some of them need more, because some of them have to eat constantly, and some of them have to move constantly because they're constantly using resources to try and kill and eat other ones. I mean, even though it's the same environment, life is coming up with is randomly mutating into all these ways, into these different equilibriums, and something upsets the equilibrium, and it different things, different proteins come into play, and everything. It's like, it's very complicated. That's why you have complicated stories like the octopus, because it's very complicated. We want to have a simple story, but it's not simple.
Okay, well, I'm ready to move on from that. What this is a good point that should be understood, and this kind of can apply to more than just circulatory systems, but it says here, an important concept is that homology can apply to different levels of organization: genetic, molecular, cellular, tissue structure, and function. So what this is really admitting here actually is that, if you're going to make a phylogenetic tree and say these organisms are grouped together, you actually have to pick which way you want them to be grouped together, because it's actually a mess. It's a complex mess. Now, if these organisms developed from a single common ancestor over time, then you would think these organisms could be grouped together, and it would be the same at the genes, as the molecular, as the cellular, as the tissue structure, and as the function. You would think that they would go together, right? But this is actually an admission that there are a variety, and they don't fit into one group neatly at any level. So what you said about the genes, checking the genes, on the development and the early development, yeah, we can find some genes that develop. The same gene that develops the heart in a fruit fly develops the heart in a human. But there's a vast difference in the heart in a fruit fly and the heart in a human. And there's more complications than that. And by the way, we're not even in the same branch as the fruit fly, right? So anyway, it's not simple, and you can't, make these like easy development pathways.
But you're not even in the conversation, right? Because you're saying, hey, God snapped it into existence.
Yes.
So
I don't need
it's
it
curious that you're delving into all of this minutia, but the
because
scientists have to
I'm
have this minutia because they're looking at the phenomena that's in front of them, and they're realizing this picture is extremely complicated.
because I'm concerned about what these ideas have done to your brain and the brains of many people, and even caused them to not even be able to see the clearest evidence for God, which is the design, the clear design that we see in nature. So that's why I'm willing to delve into this. I don't like delving into these evolutionary tall tales, but I have to do it for the sake of the people. Okay, that is why
Well,
I'm doing this, because I care
let's
about people and I don't
yeah.
want you to believe lies, Nathan.
Okay.
And
Okay.
okay,
What about this hemoglobin? What about this hemoglobin?
okay,
It looks like a mess. It looks like a mess,
okay. You want me
right?
to go back to the hemoglobin?
Yeah, the hemoglobin.
Okay.
It looks like a mess to me. If my wife walked into the room and that was sitting on the floor on giant scale, it would be a mess, a jumble of all of these twisting things. I mean, it looks like barbed wire or something. It looks like some sort of torture device. Okay.
It may look
Oh,
like that, Nathan, but it's performing very specific
yes,
functions. I mean, don't you think it's quite interesting that
yes.
these red blood cells can can bring the oxygen that your cells need, deliver the oxygen, and then pick up the waste product and take it back,
That's
and
right.
then get it out of the body.
That's
That's
right. But it
yeah.
doesn't look designed to me.
Oh my gosh, this is crazy.
When humans design something, right? You know, the beauty, the form, right, is part of the design. This doesn't look designed. This looks like it works because it works, and that's why it's there. It's all performance. No form, no beauty, no aesthetic there.
Well,
It's just there because it works. And if you
well,
change
I
one little thing on it, it no
use
longer works the same.
yeah, because it is a complex piece of machinery. And just like if you went to a factory and there was a big gigantic machine, you might say, okay, that's quite ugly, but it might perform a very specific function. And if you take one part out of it, it might not work. So I don't see, I mean, wow, that's the argument. Like this looks like
I
a
have to
clump
use these
of
types of
nothing.
arguments with you because
Well,
you're appealing to snap a finger. You know what I mean? If you
well,
appeal to snap a finger and it's all there, then I have to say, okay, well now I'm probing why it looks like it does if it's a snap of the finger.
well, let me
And then
ask
you
you
say, oh
this.
well, because it works. Well, that's what
Okay,
the
is
evolutionist
a
is saying. It's saying
human
it works.
is a human being beautiful and formly?
I think humans look great, but
Okay, so then
I'm in a human suit. I
right,
can't
but
escape being human, so I can't tell you what humans look like. To an alien race, we might look awful. I don't know.
okay. Well, complex piece of machinery, and so anyway, I'm going to move on from that argument. But now this is the one of the conclusions. These are the conclusions of the paper, okay? And I'm just going to read the highlighted part. It says an important take-home message is that cardiovascular systems are highly diverse in their structure and function. The design of a given system is exquisitely matched to the needs of the animal. It is not helpful to think of one system being superior to another. Mollusks have no more need for a human heart than humans have for a mollusk heart. Okay, so a couple of things. So it's admitting that these are diverse in their structure and function, and that they are exquisitely matched to the needs of the animal. But what is that word there? Design? Wait a minute. This is supposed to be time and chance and natural processes. The design? Who's doing the designing? Now, Nathan has a designer, okay? He has God. So I don't know why God doesn't get to do anything in his universe, but
He
this
is
okay.
through
So
time and chance.
But why are we invoking design when it's supposed to be this is time, chance, and material processes having this happen? So I think this is a great acknowledgement of the whole problem of trying to get a cardiovascular system to come together and to work to bring nutrients in an organism.
So what this tells me is that, and again, I think this goes back to the soup, all right, is that getting nutrients and waste, getting rid of waste, are really a fundamental aspect of life. And so this ability to choose based upon the circumstance, what is happening, is a pretty rudimentary function of the machines that have developed. And so, you talked about the octopus earlier. Yes, it's crazy that you could have something in the same tree, the same branch of the tree, end up with a completely different system. But if you think about it as, waste and food acquisition, getting rid of waste, getting food, that it's good for life because it's such a fundamental process that if things change or the needs change, that machinery is pretty, the ability to construct different things is pretty deep into the machinery code. You know what I mean?
Okay, so into the code. Now, but you believe the code came about by natural processes?
Yes, over time.
Okay, well, again, we have no evidence that a code can come about by material processes with no mind involved. Taya says exactly that's why vertebrates have an endothelium with specialized cells that transport fluid by contraction, muscular pumps, blood vascular systems. Okay, well, I think that a reasonable person will recognize the problem with getting to a circulatory system by a step-by-step process. But if, there may be people who are convinced by these evolutionary stories, Nathan, do you want to say any final words and then we'll introduce your topic for next week?
I think science is messy. I think it's got human elements, and you see that all the time. And we're also human, and so like this design, where they're using a word, design or something like that. It's because we're combining these concepts, to communicate. And maybe it wasn't the best choice of words. People make mistakes. They go down different avenues of research, and so science is very messy. I think it's because they're approaching a very complicated system that's arisen over time.
Okay, well, thank you for making that case. And so the topic for next week.
Addressing the gorilla in the room. So, if God snapped the world into existence, and we're God's special creature, made on the sixth day, so different from all the other creatures, with the image of God and all that, why then are there gorillas that seem to be all very similar to us biologically? Why not just make us the only gorilla-like creature? Especially if it's just according to our own kinds, like Rebekah said. Oh, is he one of our kinds? Is this according to our kinds? The gorilla, the giant gorilla, the gorilla that hangs in trees and eats banana. Wait, that sounds a lot like a vacation to me. Sitting in a tree, eating bananas all the time, just hanging out. Some people go to vacations in tree houses, to hang out in the trees. So why do these things exist if we're supposed to be so different?
Okay, this is hilarious that you chose this topic, which is because me and Jeremy have been making this joke all week that the best, the evidence that people point to is just monkey look like a person. Like that is like that, that's what it comes down to. Like all of this evolutionary storytelling is just like, but monkey looks like a person, like, so I think it's hilarious that you chose this topic, because I'm happy to address monkey looks like a person. Okay,
All right.
I'm ready to go. I'm this will be a fun one, so looking forward to next week. So thank you for everybody who watched tonight. It's really fun having you guys here. And I didn't say hello to Dave the Brahmin. Glad you're here. And thanks, Taya, for all your, BS Lewis too. Thanks for watching, guys. And thanks, Taya, for all of your circulatory system comments. And hope everybody
it's great to have an unfair friend evolution person. Thank you so much, Taya. Yeah.
I wouldn't get too comfortable with that. She hasn't picked a side yet.
Okay.
All right. Bye, everyone. Thanks.